The first blow came from her own mother. Rowan Darkhollow had expected cruelty from the pack, had braced herself for the cold shoulders and whispered accusations that had followed her through the great hall like a poisonous fog. But when her mother's palm cracked across her face with enough force to split her lip, something inside Rowan shattered that she hadn't known was still intact. "You have brought shame upon this family," Alara Darkhollow hissed, her eyes, the same deep brown as Rowan's own, burning with a disgust that cut deeper than any physical wound. 7 months carrying another male's bastard while bonded to the future alpha. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? Blood filled Rowan's mouth, copper and warm, and she pressed a trembling hand to her swollen belly as if she could shield her unborn daughter from the hatred saturating the air. The baby kicked against her palm, strong and insistent, and Rowan clung to that small rebellion like a lifeline. "It's not true," she whispered, though she knew the words were useless. She had spoken them 100 times in the 3 days since Orion had stood before the entire pack and denounced her. Since he had looked at her rounded belly with theatrical revulsion and declared that the child she carried could not possibly be his. "Mother, I would never." Silence. Her father's voice cracked through the room like a whip, and Rowan flinched despite herself. Aldrich Darkhollow stood in the doorway of their family home, his face carved from the same cold stone that had built these walls. "You are no daughter of mine, not anymore." The words shouldn't have hurt. Rowan had known this was coming from the moment Orion's lies had left his beautiful, treacherous mouth, but knowing and feeling were different things entirely, and she found herself reaching for the rough wooden table to keep from crumpling to the floor. "He's lying," her wolf whimpered from somewhere deep inside her, the voice barely a whisper now. 3 days ago, when Orion had publicly rejected their mate bond, Rowan had felt something tear loose in her soul. Her wolf had howled in agony, then retreated to some dark corner where Rowan could barely sense her anymore. "Our mate is lying. Why is he lying?" She didn't have an answer. She had replayed every moment of the past 7 months, searching for some sign she had missed, some warning that Orion Stormborn, the male who had held her through her first heat, who had whispered promises of forever against her skin, who had wept with joy when she told him about the baby, had been capable of such betrayal. But there had been nothing. He had been perfect, devoted, everything a mate should be. Until 3 days ago, when he had looked at her like she was something rotting he'd found on the bottom of his boot. "The Pack Council has made their decision," her father continued, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are to be exiled at dawn. You will take nothing that belongs to this pack. No food, no supplies, no—" "It's winter," Rowan breathed, horror clawing up her throat. "Father, I'm 7 months pregnant. I'll die out there. The baby will die." "Then perhaps you should have considered that before spreading your legs for another male." The cruelty of it stole her breath. She stared at the male who had bounced her on his knee as a child, who had taught her to track deer through the forest, who had cried at her mating ceremony. He stared back with the eyes of a stranger. "I didn't," she said, her voice cracking. "Father, I swear on the moon goddess herself, I have never touched another male. This baby is Orion's. She's his daughter, she's—" "Enough." Her mother's hand struck again, harder this time, and Rowan stumbled backward, her hip colliding with the edge of the table. Pain shot through her side, and she gasped, curling protectively around her belly. "We have seen the evidence. Orion showed the council the letters, the gifts from your lover. Do you think us fools?" Letters. Gifts. Rowan's mind spun, trying to make sense of words that refused to form a coherent picture. What letters? What gifts? She had never received anything from anyone except Orion himself. Understanding crashed through her like ice water, and suddenly she could see it all with terrible clarity. The nights he had come home late, smelling of perfume he claimed was from the pack house. The way he had grown distant in recent weeks, his touches becoming perfunctory, his smiles not quite reaching his eyes. The way he had insisted she rest more, stay home more, keep to herself more. He had been planning this. For weeks, perhaps months, he had been building the framework of her destruction, and she had been too blind, too trusting, too stupidly in love to see it. And suddenly she remembered. Sarah Blackthorne, the daughter of the neighboring pack's alpha, the female Orion had been meeting with more and more frequently these past months. Business discussions, he had called them. Pack alliances. It's Sarah, isn't it? The words left Rowan's mouth before she could stop them, sharp and bitter. Sarah Blackthorne, that's who you chose over me, over your own daughter. She hadn't heard him enter, but suddenly he was there, filling the doorway her father had vacated. Orion Stormborn, golden-haired and green-eyed, beautiful as a summer sunrise and just as impossible to hold. Once, the sight of him had made her heart sing. Now it made her stomach turn. I don't know what you're talking about. His voice was smooth, practiced, but she saw something flicker behind his eyes. Guilt, perhaps. Or maybe just annoyance that she wasn't playing her part properly. I'm here to ensure you understand the terms of your exile. There is no other male, Rowan said, and she was surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Her wolf stirred, rising from her grief-struck stupor, lending Rowan strength she hadn't known she still possessed. You know there isn't. This child is yours, Orion. She has your blood. I want nothing to do with that abomination. He spat the words like poison, and Rowan watched something cold and satisfied slither across his features. Let your lover claim it. Let him. There is no lover. Her voice rose to a scream, and she felt her wolf surge forward, felt her eyes flash gold for just a moment before the broken bond dragged them both back down. You're lying, and I don't understand why, but I know you're lying. I can feel it. Our bond may be shattered, but I can still feel. His hand closed around her throat before she could finish, slamming her back against the wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Rowan's hands flew to his wrist, clawing uselessly at the iron grip, cutting off her air. Listen to me carefully, Orion breathed, his face inches from hers, his beautiful features twisted into something monstrous. You will leave at dawn. You will never speak of this child being mine again. And if you ever try to return, if you ever try to claim what isn't yours, I will kill you myself and mount your head on the packhouse gates. Do you understand? Stars exploded across Rowan's vision. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except claw weakly at his arm while her baby thrashed in distress inside her. Orion. Her father's voice, distant and unconcerned. That's enough. She needs to be able to walk out of here at dawn. Orion released her, and she crumpled to the floor, gasping and coughing, one hand pressed to her bruised throat, while the other curved protectively over her belly. The baby was still moving, still fighting, and Rowan clung to that with everything she had. Dawn, Orion said, straightening his jacket with casual indifference. Don't make me come find you, Rowan. You won't enjoy what happens if I do. He left without looking back. Her parents followed moments later, the door slamming shut behind them with a finality that echoed through Rowan's bones. She lay there on the cold floor of her childhood home, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer belonged to her, and let the tears fall. We have to run, her wolf whispered, the voice stronger now, sharpened by survival instinct. Now, before dawn, before they can hurt us again. Run where? Rowan wanted to ask. They were in the heart of Dark Hollow territory, surrounded by pack members who had already been told she was a faithless whore. The winter storms had been raging for weeks, burying the mountain passes in snow deep enough to swallow a wolf whole. She was 7 months pregnant, bruised and bleeding, with no supplies and no allies. She would die out there, They both would. Better to die free than to wait for them to kill us here. The thought crystallized something inside Rowan, burning away the fog of grief and shock that had clouded her mind since the rejection. Her wolf was right. Whatever Orion was planning, and she was certain now that he was planning something that required her complete destruction. She couldn't face it from inside a cage. She had to run. Moving as quietly as she could, Rowan pushed herself to her feet. Her throat ached with every swallow, and her hip throbbed where she'd struck the table, but she forced herself to ignore the pain. There would be time for pain later. Right now, there was only survival. The window in her old bedroom faced the forest, away from the pack house and the sentinels who would be watching the main paths. Rowan eased it open, wincing at the squeal of cold hinges, and stared out into the howling darkness. Snow fell in thick curtains, obscuring everything more than a few feet away. The wind cut like knives, carrying with it the promise of a death by freezing. Only a fool would venture out into this storm. Only a fool, or a mother with nothing left to lose. The Shadowfang Kingdom, her wolf whispered, and Rowan felt the words settle into her chest like a prayer. The border is 2 days' travel. The Alpha King gives sanctuary to those with nowhere else to go. Rowan had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. Alpha King Dante Shadowfang, ruler of the largest and most powerful kingdom in all the territories, a male so ancient and formidable that even the bravest warriors spoke his name in hushed tones. They said he had frozen his heart after losing his mate 3 centuries ago. They said he was more monster than man, more shadow than flesh. They also said he never turned away those who came to him in genuine need. Rowan climbed through the window, gasping as the cold hit her like a physical blow. Her thin nightdress offered no protection against the winter's fury, and she knew with grim certainty that she would not survive long without shelter. But she would not survive at all if she stayed. "Run!" her wolf commanded. "Run, and don't look back." Rowan ran. She shifted as she hit the tree line, her wolf form bursting free with a surge of desperate energy. The change was agony, her pregnant belly making the transformation awkward and painful. But her wolf's thick fur immediately cut the worst of the cold, and her 4 legs carried her faster than 2 ever could. Behind her, someone shouted. A sentinel, perhaps, or one of the pack wolves who had been set to watch her. Rowan didn't turn to look. She plunged into the darkness between the trees and let the storm swallow her whole. Shadowfang, she thought, the name becoming a rhythm that matched her pounding paws. Shadowfang, Shadowfang, Shadowfang. It was a prayer and a promise, and the only hope she had left. She ran toward the border of a kingdom ruled by a monster, carrying the child of a mate who had betrayed her, fleeing a pack that wanted her dead. She ran, and she did not look back. The storm pursued her like a living thing, hungry and relentless, determined to claim what the Dark Hollow Pack had failed to destroy. Rowan lost track of time somewhere in that endless white darkness, her world narrowing to the burning in her lungs, the ache in her legs, the desperate rhythm of her paws against the frozen ground. "Keep moving," her wolf urged, though even that inner voice had grown thin with exhaustion. The border. We must reach the border. But the border seemed impossibly far, a dream dissolving with each labored breath. The snow had stopped falling sometime during the second night, but the cold had intensified, seeping through her thick fur to freeze the very blood in her veins. Rowan's pregnant belly dragged at her with every stride, the weight of her daughter pulling her toward the earth, toward rest, toward the sweet oblivion of sleep. Not sleep, she reminded herself fiercely. Death. Sleep is death out here. She stumbled over a hidden root and went down hard, her muzzle plowing through a drift of snow that burned like fire against her nose. For a long moment she simply lay there, panting, watching her breath form clouds that vanished into the darkness. The baby shifted inside her, a small foot pressing against her ribs, and Rowan felt tears freeze on her cheeks before they could fall. "I'm sorry," she thought, curling around her belly as if she could somehow transfer what little warmth remained in her body. "I'm so sorry, little one. I tried. I tried so hard." The darkness at the edges of her vision began to creep inward, soft and welcoming. She could rest now, just for a moment. Just long enough to catch her breath, to gather her strength too. "Here, I found her!" The voice shattered the peaceful silence like a stone through ice. Rowan's wolf surged upward, snarling with the last of their strength, but her body refused to cooperate. She could only watch, helpless and terrified, as shapes emerged from the darkness between the trees. Wolves, 3 of them, massive and dark-furred, their eyes gleaming in the faint starlight. They moved with the fluid coordination of a trained patrol, fanning out to surround her, and Rowan knew with cold certainty that she had failed. Orion's wolves had found her. They would drag her back to Dark Hollow, or perhaps simply kill her here in the snow and leave her body for the carrion birds. No. Her wolf's voice was a growl of defiance, thin but fierce. "We will not die on our bellies. We will not give them the satisfaction." Rowan forced herself to her feet, legs trembling so violently she could barely stand. She bared her teeth at the approaching wolves, a laughable threat from a pregnant female half dead from cold and exhaustion, but it was all she had left. "Easy," one of the wolves said, shifting to his human form with a grace that spoke of centuries of practice. He was older, gray-streaked and scarred, his face weathered by time and battle, not a face she recognized, not Dark Hollow. "Easy, female, we mean you no harm." The words made no sense. Rowan's frozen mind struggled to process them, to reconcile them with everything she knew about the world. Wolves didn't help strange females who wandered into their territory. Wolves killed them, or worse. "You've crossed into Shadowfang lands," the male continued, his voice gentling as he took in her condition, the swollen belly, the wound still visible beneath her matted fur, the way she swayed on her feet. "You're safe here. The Alpha King grants sanctuary to all who seek it. Will you come with us?" Shadowfang. The word pierced the fog of exhaustion clouding Rowan's thoughts. She had made it. Against all odds, against everything that had tried to stop her, she had reached the border. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she shifted without meaning to, her human form crashing to the frozen ground in a heap of bare skin and tangled hair. The cold was unbearable now, cutting through her thin nightdress like 1,000 tiny knives, but she couldn't seem to make her body move anymore. "Goddess above," the older male breathed, rushing forward to strip off his cloak and wrap it around her shaking form. "She's pregnant, heavily, and these wounds. Someone get me a stretcher. Now." Rowan tried to speak, to explain, to thank them, but her voice had frozen along with everything else. She could only clutch the warm fabric around her belly and watch through dimming eyes as the Shadowfang wolves moved with urgent efficiency, producing a stretcher from somewhere and lifting her onto it with a gentleness she hadn't experienced in what felt like a lifetime. "Hold on," the older male said, his scarred face hovering above hers as they began to move. "The palace isn't far. The healers will take care of you. Just hold on." She tried. She held on through the jostling of the stretcher, through the growing warmth as they entered some kind of building, through the blur of faces and voices that surrounded her. She held on through the hands that stripped away her ruined nightdress and wrapped her in heated blankets, through the cool touch of healing magic against her wounds, through the concerned questions she couldn't answer. But when the darkness finally came for her, soft and insistent, she was too tired to fight it anymore. She let go. Rowan woke to warmth. It was such a foreign sensation that for a long moment she simply lay there with her eyes closed, convinced she must be dreaming. Real warmth, the kind that seeped into bones and thawed frozen blood, that spoke of roaring fires and thick blankets and safety. She hadn't felt safe in so long that she had forgotten what it tasted like. "She's waking." The voice was female, soft and musical, and Rowan forced her eyes open to find a young woman with silver hair leaning over her. The woman smiled, her features delicate and kind, and pressed a cup of something warm and fragrant to Rowan's cracked lips. "Slowly," she cautioned. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. Your body needs time to remember how to function." 2 days. Rowan's hand flew to her belly, panic surging through her veins, but the woman caught her wrist with gentle fingers. "Your daughter is fine," she said, and the words were like a balm on Rowan's ravaged soul. "Strong and healthy, despite everything. She's a fighter, that one, just like her mother." Tears burned in Rowan's eyes, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned her face away, ashamed of her own weakness, but the woman simply handed her a cloth and stepped back to give her privacy. "I'm Lysandra," she said, moving to a nearby table to pour another cup of the fragrant tea. "I'm the head healer here at the Shadowfang Palace. You've been in my care since the Border Patrol brought you in. I must say, you gave us quite a scare. Another hour in that storm, and we would have lost you both." The palace. Rowan's mind struggled to catch up, memories filtering back in fragments and flashes. The storm, the wolves, the older male with the scarred face and kind eyes. She had made it to Shadowfang, had actually reached the sanctuary she had prayed for. "The king has been informed of your presence," Lysandra continued, her voice carefully neutral. "He's requested an audience once you're strong enough, but there's no rush. You need rest and food and time to heal. Whatever happened to you?" She paused, her eyes flicking to the bruises that still mottled Rowan's throat, the claw marks that scored her arms and shoulders. "You're safe here. No one will harm you in this palace. I give you my word." Rowan wanted to believe her, wanted to sink into the soft bed and let herself trust in the kindness she saw in the healer's eyes. But trust had been beaten out of her, torn away along with her mate bond and her family and everything she had once held dear. "Why?" Her voice was a rasp, barely recognizable. "Why would the Alpha King take in a stranger? What does he want from me?" Lysandra's expression softened with something that looked almost like pity. "The king gives sanctuary to all who seek it. He asks nothing in return except that you follow the laws of his kingdom and bring no harm to his people. Whatever you're running from, whatever brought you to our border half dead and pregnant in the middle of winter, you don't have to tell anyone until you're ready. Your secrets are your own." It was too good to be true. Nothing in Rowan's experience had prepared her for kindness without strings, for safety without price. She waited for the other shoe to drop, for the trap to spring closed around her. But Lysandra simply smiled again and pressed a fresh cup of tea into her trembling hands. "Rest now," the healer said, moving toward the door. "I'll have food sent up. The king will wait until you're strong enough to meet him. You have time." She was gone before Rowan could respond, leaving her alone in the most luxurious room she had ever seen. Rich tapestries covered the walls, depicting scenes of wolves running through moonlit forests, and a fire crackled merrily in an enormous stone hearth. The bed itself was a marvel, larger than her entire room had been in Dark Hollow, piled high with furs and blankets that cocooned her in warmth. "We made it," her wolf whispered, the voice stronger now, threaded with cautious hope. "We're alive. The baby is alive. We made it." Rowan pressed her palm to her belly, feeling her daughter kick in response, and allowed herself a single moment of relief before the fear came rushing back. She was alive, yes. She had escaped Dark Hollow, had survived the storm, had found sanctuary in the most powerful kingdom in all the territories. But for how long? How long before Orion discovered where she had gone? How long before his lies followed her even here, poisoning everything she tried to build? She thought of his hand around her throat, his eyes cold with satisfaction, his voice promising death if she ever tried to return. He had wanted her gone, had engineered her destruction with careful precision. Why? What was he planning that required her complete erasure from the pack? The questions circled in her mind like hungry wolves, but exhaustion pulled at her consciousness, dragging her back toward sleep. She fought it for as long as she could, afraid of what dreams might find her in the darkness, but her body was too weak, too depleted to resist. When sleep claimed her, she dreamed of golden eyes and broken promises, of blood on snow and a child crying in the darkness. It was 3 more days before Rowan was strong enough to leave her bed. Lysandra had been a constant presence, appearing at regular intervals with food and medicine and quiet conversation that demanded nothing in return. The healer never pressed for details about what had happened, never asked about the wounds or the bruises or the terror that lurked behind Rowan's eyes. She simply cared for her patient with gentle efficiency, coaxing her to eat, to drink, to rest, to let her battered body heal. Rowan found herself growing almost comfortable in the healer's presence, despite her determination to trust no one. There was something soothing about Lysandra's calm demeanor, her quiet competence, the way she treated Rowan like a person rather than a problem to be solved. "The king has asked again about an audience," Lysandra said on the morning of Rowan's 4th day in the palace. She helped Rowan into a simple but well-made dress of deep blue wool, soft as clouds against her skin. "He's been impatient. It's not like him. Usually he cares little for the refugees who pass through our borders. But you—" She paused, something flickering across her features. "He's asked after you every day, multiple times a day actually. I've never seen him so interested in anyone." The word sent a chill down Rowan's spine. "What does he want?" "That's the strange thing," Lysandra admitted, adjusting the lacing at Rowan's back to accommodate her pregnant belly. "He hasn't said. He just asks if you're awake, if you're eating, if the baby is healthy." Questions a healer might ask, not a king. She shook her head, silver hair catching the firelight. "I've served in this palace for nearly a century, and I've never seen Alphadante behave this way. It's as if—" She cut herself off, pressing her lips together. "As if what?" Lysandra hesitated, then sighed. "As if he's waiting for something. Something important. Something he's been waiting for a very long time." Before Rowan could ask what she meant, a knock sounded at the door. Lysandra opened it to reveal a tall male in the formal uniform of the palace guard, his expression carefully blank. "The king requests the female's presence in the throne room," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Immediately." Rowan's heart stuttered in her chest. She wasn't ready. Wasn't strong enough. Wasn't prepared enough. Wasn't— "She'll be there," Lysandra said smoothly, cutting off Rowan's spiral of panic. She turned to face her patient, taking Rowan's trembling hands in her own. "Listen to me. Whatever happens in that throne room, remember that you are under the king's protection. No one can harm you here. No one can force you to leave. You have rights in this kingdom, rights that not even the king himself can take from you. Do you understand?" Rowan nodded, though understanding felt very far away. "Good." Lysandra squeezed her hands, then released them. "Now go. And remember, the king may be powerful, but you are not powerless. You survived something terrible, and you're still standing. That's a kind of strength most wolves never find." The walk to the throne room felt like a death march. Rowan's legs trembled with every step, though whether from lingering weakness or sheer terror, she couldn't tell. The guard who escorted her moved with silent efficiency, leading her through corridors that seemed to stretch on forever, past tapestries and statues and closed doors behind which she could hear the muffled sounds of a living palace. She tried to prepare herself, tried to construct some kind of speech that might explain her presence, her flight, her desperate need for sanctuary. But every word she formed dissolved in her throat, washed away by the tide of fear that rose higher with every step. The throne room doors loomed before her, massive and dark, carved with the image of a wolf mid-howl against a full moon. The guard pulled them open, and Rowan stepped inside. Her first impression was of vastness, a cavernous space of black stone and silver moonlight, cold and beautiful and terrifying. Torches flickered in iron sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows across the floor, and at the far end of the room, raised on a dais of obsidian, stood an empty throne. No, not empty. A figure stood before the throne, facing away from her, his silhouette dark against the silver glow of the massive windows behind him. He was tall, impossibly tall, broad-shouldered and powerful, his presence filling the room in a way that made the air feel thick and heavy. Long, dark hair fell past his shoulders, threaded with strands of silver that caught the torchlight. "Leave us," he said, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together in the depths of the earth. The guard behind Rowan bowed and withdrew, the doors closing with a boom that echoed through the chamber like a death knell. She was alone with the Alpha King of Shadowfang, the monster of legend, the male who had frozen his heart 3 centuries ago and never let it thaw. He turned. The world stopped. Later, Rowan would try to describe what happened in that moment, would search for words that could capture the magnitude of the thing that crashed through her consciousness like a tidal wave. But language failed her, as it always would, when she tried to explain what it felt like to meet Alpha King Dante Shadowfang's eyes for the first time. He was beautiful, in the way that storms are beautiful, in the way that avalanches and wildfires and the endless depths of the ocean are beautiful. His face was carved from shadows and silver, all sharp angles and cold perfection, with a strong jaw and high cheekbones that spoke of ancient noble bloodlines. But it was his eyes that captured her, that reached across the distance between them and wrapped around her soul with fingers of fire and ice. They were silver, those eyes, pale as moonlight on fresh snow, cold and remote as the stars themselves. They held centuries of loneliness, eons of isolation, a grief so vast and deep that it had carved canyons through his immortal soul. She saw a male who had loved once, who had lost that love so completely that he had built walls around his heart thick enough to withstand eternity. And then those silver eyes blazed gold. Heat exploded through Rowan's body, starting in her chest and radiating outward in waves that left her gasping. It was like nothing she had ever felt, nothing she had ever imagined, a warmth so intense it should have burned, a connection so sudden and profound that it knocked the breath from her lungs. Her wolf, dormant for so long, surged to the surface with a howl of recognition that reverberated through every cell of her being. "Mate," her wolf screamed. "Mate! Mate! Mate!" Across the room, the Alpha King went rigid as if he'd been struck by lightning. A sound tore from his throat, low and involuntary, a growl that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest, somewhere primal and ancient and utterly wild. His hands, which had been clasped behind his back, flew to his sides, fingers curling into fists so tight his knuckles went white. "No," he breathed, and the word was ragged, broken, thick with an emotion Rowan couldn't name. "It's not possible. It's not—" He moved. One moment he was standing by the throne, a vast distance between them. The next he was in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive body, could smell the scent of him, pine and winter storms and something darker, something that made her wolf whimper with longing. Rowan stumbled backward, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was wrong. This was impossible. She still bore the shattered remains of her bond with Orion, could still feel the jagged edges of it cutting at her soul. She couldn't be mated to someone else. The moon goddess didn't give second chances to wolves who had already been claimed and discarded. But the heat pulsing through her veins didn't care about what should or shouldn't be possible. It burned regardless, a wildfire consuming everything in its path. "Your eyes," Dante said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper, rough with wonder and something that might have been fear. "They're gold. I can see the gold." Rowan didn't know what her eyes looked like. She only knew that looking into his felt like falling from a great height, like losing herself in a current too strong to resist. The broken bond inside her stirred, trembled, and then, impossibly, terrifyingly, began to mend. No, not mend. Replace. A new bond was forming, a connection so powerful it made the one she'd shared with Orion seem like a candle flame compared to a bonfire. She could feel it taking root in her chest, spreading tendrils of warmth through her entire body, reaching for the male standing before her with an intensity that left her breathless. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her voice cracking. I was already." "Rejected," Dante finished, and his silver gold eyes dropped to her belly, to the visible swell of her pregnancy. "The Border Patrol told me. A pregnant female, bearing the marks of violence, fleeing through a winter storm. They said you were half dead when they found you, that you nearly didn't survive the night." He dropped to his knees. The sight was so unexpected, so utterly at odds with everything Rowan had heard about the fearsome Alpha King, that she could only stand frozen as the most powerful wolf in all the territories knelt before her on the cold stone floor. His hands rose, trembling visibly, and hovered over her swollen belly without quite touching. The look on his face was one of reverent wonder, as if he were gazing upon something sacred, something miraculous, something he had never dared hope to see. "Impossible," he whispered again, but this time the word carried no denial, only awe. 300 years. 300 years I have waited, prayed, begged the goddess to give me another chance. And now—" His voice broke, and Rowan saw with shock that tears were gathering in those ancient, weary eyes. "Now she sends me you. Both of you." The baby chose that moment to kick, hard enough that Rowan gasped and pressed her hand to her side. Dante's head snapped up, alarm flashing across his features. "The child," he said, rising swiftly but still maintaining a careful distance. "Is she... Are you—" "She's fine," Rowan managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She kicks when she's startled. Or excited. Or when I'm feeling strong emotions." Which was an understatement of such magnitude that it almost made her laugh, though the sound that escaped her lips was closer to a sob. The bond between them pulsed with warmth, with yearning, with a need so intense it made her knees weak. Her wolf was howling in her chest, demanding that she close the distance between them, that she bury her face in his neck and breathe in his scent, that she let him mark her and claim her, and make her his in every way that mattered. But Rowan had trusted her wolf once before, had believed in the mate bond that had connected her to Orion. That trust had cost her everything. She couldn't afford to trust again. "I don't understand," she said, wrapping her arms around herself as if she could somehow contain the chaos inside her. "I don't. This doesn't make any sense. I was mated, claimed, marked. You can't. The goddess doesn't give second mates. It's not possible." "It's rare," Dante corrected gently, his eyes never leaving her face. "Not impossible. When a wolf is rejected by their true mate, when the bond is broken through betrayal rather than death, the goddess sometimes grants a second chance. A true mate, destined from birth, whose soul has been waiting for its other half." His voice dropped, became almost reverent. "I never believed the stories. Not until now." Rowan shook her head, backing away until her shoulders hit the cold stone of the wall behind her. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, what I've been accused of. My own pack cast me out. My own mate. She choked on the word. My former mate told everyone I was unfaithful, that this child isn't his, that I spread my legs for another male while wearing his mark. She didn't know why she was telling him this, why she was giving him ammunition to use against her. But the words poured out like blood from a wound, unstoppable and urgent, as if confessing her shame might somehow break this impossible bond between them. He lied. Dante's voice was flat, certain, his eyes hardening to silver steel. One doesn't need to hear your version to know the truth. No female carrying her mate's child would flee into a winter storm knowing she would likely die. No faithful wolf would bear the marks of violence from her own pack. He took a step toward her, then stopped, visibly restraining himself. Whatever your former mate accused you of, it was a lie. I would stake my kingdom on it. You don't know that, Rowan whispered. You can't know that. I can. He touched his chest, directly over his heart. The bond tells me. It knows you better than I know myself, better than I know anything. It tells me you are good, and true, and brave, beyond measure. It tells me you have been hurt, betrayed, broken. And it tells me, his voice cracked again, Yos, that you are mine, as I am yours. Whether either of us wanted it or not. The night terrors came without warning. Rowan had fallen asleep in the massive bed they'd given her, exhausted from the emotional devastation of the throne room confrontation, and for a few hours she had known peace. But peace never lasted. Not for her. In the dream, she was back in Dark Hollow. Orion's hand closed around her throat, tighter this time, tighter than it had really been, and his beautiful face twisted into something monstrous as he squeezed the life from her. You are nothing, he snarled, his green eyes burning with hatred. You were never anything, and when I'm done with you, no one will even remember you existed. She couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. Could only watch as shadows gathered at the edges of her vision, creeping closer, closer. No, no, please. She woke to her own screaming, her voice raw and broken, her hands clawing at a throat that felt like it was still being crushed. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, didn't recognize the luxurious room, or the soft bed, or the dying fire in the hearth. Panic surged through her, wild and uncontrollable, and she scrambled backward until her spine hit the ornate headboard. Easy. Easy, you're safe. You're in Shadowfang. No one is hurting you. The voice came from across the room, low and gentle, carefully measured to avoid startling her further. Rowan's wild eyes found the source and her breath caught in her throat. Dante sat in a chair by the door, dressed in simple clothes rather than the formal attire he'd worn in the throne room. His dark hair, threaded with silver, was loose around his shoulders, and in the dim light of the embers, he looked younger somehow, the hard lines of his face softened by shadows. What? Rowan's voice cracked, her throat raw from screaming. What are you doing here? I couldn't sleep, he said simply. I tried after our conversation, but the bond? He pressed his hand to his chest, his expression twisting with something like pain. It wouldn't settle. It kept pulling me toward you, insisting you were in distress. I thought perhaps if I was nearby. He cut himself off, looking almost embarrassed. I should have asked permission. I'm sorry. I didn't enter your room, I swear it. I've been in the hallway since midnight. When I heard you screaming, He trailed off, rising from his chair. I'll go. I'm sorry for disturbing. Wait. The word left Rowan's mouth before she could stop it, and she watched surprise flicker across Dante's ancient features. She was surprised too, shocked by her own reluctance to see him leave. Every instinct she had screamed that she should be afraid, should be suspicious, should demand that he leave her alone. But beneath those screaming instincts, Something else stirred, something that recognized him, that yearned toward him, that felt the vast emptiness inside her reaching for the vast emptiness inside him. The nightmares, she said quietly, her voice still rough. They come every night. Since everything happened. I can't seem to stop them. Dante remained standing by the doorway, his posture rigid with restraint. What do you dream of? Him. Orion. His hands around my throat, telling me I'm nothing. She shuddered, wrapping her arms around herself. Sometimes it's my mother's face, looking at me like I'm something to be scraped off her shoe. Sometimes it's the snow, the cold, the feeling of dying alone in the dark. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes it's my daughter, crying for a mother who can't protect her. A low sound rumbled from Dante's chest, a growl of fury that he quickly suppressed. I would kill them all, he said, his voice dark with promise. Everyone who hurt you, everyone who made you feel worthless. I would tear them apart with my bare hands and feel nothing but satisfaction. The words should have terrified her. They came from the lips of a male powerful enough to make good on every bloody syllable, a king whose wrath could level entire kingdoms. But instead of fear, Rowan felt something else stir in her chest. Comfort. You don't know me, she said again, but the protest was weaker now, more confusion than conviction. I know enough. He moved toward her, then stopped, visibly checking himself. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and she could see the effort it cost him to maintain his distance. I know you ran into a death storm to protect your child. I know you fought through wounds that would have felled a lesser wolf. I know you survived something that was meant to destroy you. And you're still here. Still breathing. Still fighting. His silver eyes burned into hers. I know you are the mate the goddess has been keeping from me for 300 years. And I know that I would rather die than add to your pain. Rowan stared at him, at this male who was everything she had been taught to fear, and felt the walls around her heart tremble. You were sitting outside my room, she said slowly. All night? Yes. You weren't going to come in? Even though the bond... She pressed her own hand to her chest, where that impossible warmth still pulsed. Even though it must be driving you as mad as it's driving me? Something flickered in his eyes, something raw and vulnerable that he quickly shuddered. You've been hurt enough. I won't add to it by forcing myself where I'm not wanted. If you need me gone, I'll go. If you never want to see me again, I'll arrange for you to have quarters on the other side of the palace. Whatever you need to feel safe. Stay. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Rowan watched Dante's expression shift, watched hope and fear and desperate longing chase each other across his ancient features. Stay, she said again, and the word felt like stepping off a cliff into darkness. Not in the bed, not like that, but here, in the room, in the chair by the fire, just here. He moved to the chair before she could change her mind, settling into it with careful grace. The firelight played across his face, illuminating the silver strands in his dark hair, and Rowan found herself studying him, really looking for the first time. He was beautiful. Not in the golden, flashy way Orion had been beautiful, but in a way that ran deeper, darker, more enduring. His was the beauty of ancient forests and storm-carved mountains, of moonlight on still water, of things that had survived centuries and emerged stronger for the weathering. Sleep, he said softly, his eyes meeting hers across the room. I'll be here until you can rest. I ask nothing in return. Rowan lay back against the pillows, her hand resting on her belly where her daughter slept peacefully, and let her eyes drift closed. When the nightmares came again, she fought her way out of them faster than before. And when she opened her eyes, gasping and trembling, Dante was exactly where he had promised to be, sitting vigil in the chair by the fire, his silver gaze watchful and gentle, asking nothing and offering everything. She slept better that night than she had in months. The first public court appearance came sooner than Rowan would have liked. A week had passed since her arrival at Shadowfang, a week of healing and eating and slowly learning to move through the palace without flinching at every shadow. Dante had kept his distance during the days, attending to the duties of his kingdom while sending regular inquiries about her health through Lysandra. But every night, without fail, he appeared in the chair by her fire, silent and watchful, ready to guard her sleep against the demons that haunted her dreams. She had tried to tell him it wasn't necessary, that she was stronger now, more stable, able to sleep without an audience. But the words had died on her lips every time, because the truth was that she slept better with him there. The truth was that his presence soothed something inside her that had been raw and bleeding since Orion's betrayal. The truth was that she was starting to need him, and the realization terrified her. "The noble court meets today," Lysandra said, helping Rowan into a gown of deep green velvet that flowed over her pregnant belly like water. "The king wishes to formally present you as his guest, to establish your protected status before any rumors can take root." Rumors? Rowan's stomach clenched. What kind of rumors? Lysandra's expression tightened. There are always whispers when an unmated female appears in a king's court, especially a pregnant one. Some will assume you're his mistress, others will assume you're a spy. A few may recognize you from Darkhollow and spread their own version of events. She met Rowan's eyes in the mirror. The king wants to make it clear, publicly and unequivocally, that you are under his protection, that any insult to you is an insult to him personally. The words should have been comforting, but all Rowan could think about was standing in the great hall of Darkhollow, watching Orion weave his lies while the pack devoured every word. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "Face all those people, answer their questions, defend myself against—" "You won't have to defend yourself," Lysandra interrupted gently. "The king will handle the court. All you need to do is stand beside him and let him make his declaration. He will speak for you." Lysandra finished, smoothing the last fold of the velvet gown into place. "You need only be present. The king has made it clear that no one is to address you directly without his permission." Rowan stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman who gazed back. The gown transformed her, somehow making her pregnancy look regal rather than shameful, the deep green bringing out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. Her dark hair had been brushed until it gleamed, cascading over her shoulders in waves that hid the fading bruises on her neck. She looked almost beautiful, almost like someone who belonged in a palace. "What if they don't believe him?" she whispered. "What if they look at me and see what Orion saw? A faithless mate carrying a bastard child?" Lysandra's hands stilled on her shoulders. "Then they will answer to the king. And I promise you, Rowan, no one in this kingdom wants to answer to the king when he is displeased." The walk to the throne room felt endless. Every corridor stretched before her like a gauntlet, lined with servants who watched her pass with curious eyes. Some whispered behind their hands. Others simply stared. Rowan kept her chin up and her hand on her belly, drawing strength from the steady flutter of her daughter's movements. "We can do this," she told the life growing inside her. "We've survived worse than whispers." The throne room doors loomed before her, massive slabs of dark wood carved with running wolves. 2 guards in Shadowfang livery stood at attention, their expressions carefully neutral as they pulled the doors open at her approach. The hall beyond was vast and intimidating, filled with nobles arranged in clusters like flocks of predatory birds. Chandeliers dripped crystalline light across silk gowns and embroidered doublets, across jeweled throats and calculating eyes. Every head turned as Rowan entered, a wave of attention that made her skin prickle with instinctive unease. And there, at the far end of the room, Dante waited on a throne of obsidian and silver. He rose as she appeared, and the murmuring crowd fell instantly silent. His silver eyes found hers across the distance, and Rowan felt the mate bond pulse with warmth, a silent reassurance that steadied her trembling knees. "I'm here," that warmth seemed to say. "You're not alone." She walked toward him, acutely aware of every eye tracking her progress. The nobles parted before her like water before a ship's prow, creating a clear path to the dais. Some bowed their heads respectfully. Others merely watched, their expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation to barely concealed disdain. Dante descended 2 steps to meet her, extending his hand in a gesture that made several courtiers gasp aloud. An Alpha King did not reach for anyone, did not lower himself to anyone's level, did not. Rowan placed her hand in his, and his fingers closed around hers with gentle strength. "Lady Rowan of the Dark Hollow bloodline," Dante said, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "I welcome you to my court and my kingdom. From this day forward, you are under my personal protection. Any offense against you will be treated as an offense against me. Any threat to your person or your child will be answered with the full force of my authority." The declaration settled over the room like a physical weight. Rowan saw nobles exchanging glances, saw the calculation in their eyes as they reassessed the situation. A guest under the king's protection was one thing. A guest under his personal protection, announced publicly before the entire court, was something else entirely. "Your Majesty is most generous," a voice drawled from somewhere in the crowd. "But surely the court deserves some explanation. A pregnant female appears at our borders, half dead and clearly fleeing something. Are we simply to accept her presence without understanding the circumstances?" Dante's expression didn't change, but Rowan felt the bond flare with cold fury. She followed his gaze to a tall, elegant male with features sharp enough to cut glass. Lord Varin, her memory supplied. Lysandra had warned her about him. A noble of old blood and older ambitions, rumored to covet the throne itself. "The circumstances," Dante said softly, "are not your concern." "With respect, Your Majesty, I believe they are. We have heard rumors about this female, that she was cast out of Dark Hollow for infidelity, that the child she carries may not be—" "Speak another word," Dante interrupted, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, "and I will remove your tongue from your mouth." Lord Varin paled but didn't retreat. "I merely suggest that the court deserves—" Dante's power crashed through the room like a tidal wave. Rowan had felt alpha power before, Orion's petty dominance, the collective weight of the Dark Hollow elders. But this was something else entirely. This was the force of 300 years of rule compressed into a single devastating wave, pressing down on every wolf in the chamber until their knees buckled and their wolves whimpered in submission. Every noble in the room dropped to the floor. Even Lord Varenne, his face contorted with humiliation, was forced to his knees by the sheer magnitude of Dante's authority. Only Rowan remained standing, protected by the bond that pulsed between them like a living thing. Dante descended the remaining steps, moving through the sea of kneeling nobles until he stood before Varenne's trembling form. One hand came to rest on Rowan's belly, gentle despite the fury radiating from every line of his body. "This pup," he declared, his voice echoing through the silent hall, "will be my heir. This female is my honored guest and the future mother of my child. Question her honor again, and I will not stop at your tongue. I will take everything you hold dear and reduce it to ash before your eyes." Lord Varen's face had gone the color of old parchment. "Your Majesty, I meant no—" "You meant precisely what you said. Remember that I meant precisely what I said as well." Dante stepped back, releasing his hold on the room's wolves. This audience is concluded. Anyone who wishes to discuss Lady Rowan's circumstances may do so with me, in private, at their own considerable risk. The nobles rose shakily, many of them refusing to meet Rowan's eyes. Lord Varenne remained on the floor a moment longer, his expression twisted with something that looked dangerously like hatred before he mastered himself and stood with rigid dignity. Dante guided Rowan from the throne room without another word, his hand warm and steady on her lower back. She could feel the lingering tremors in her limbs, the aftershocks of witnessing power she had never imagined could exist. "You didn't have to do that," she managed once they were safely in a private corridor. "Threaten him so publicly, make such a declaration about the child being your heir. We haven't even discussed." There was nothing to discuss. Dante stopped walking, turning to face her with those ancient eyes that saw too much, too deeply. "Your daughter will be raised as my own. She will want for nothing. She will be protected and cherished and given every advantage my kingdom can provide." "This is not negotiable." Rowan's throat tightened. "Why? You barely know me. You don't know her at all. Why would you?" "Because you are my mate," he said simply. "And she is a part of you. That makes her mine as well, in every way that matters." Mate. The word shivered through her, warming places she had thought permanently frozen. Her wolf stirred, pressing against her consciousness with a yearning that was almost painful in its intensity. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Orion spent 2 years telling me I was his, and I believed him. But he would never have stood before his entire pack and declared, 'Then Orion was a fool.'" Dante's hand rose to her cheek, his touch feather-light, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. What he did to you, the lies he told, the way he discarded you like you were nothing, that speaks to his character, not your worth. You deserve to be protected. You deserve to be defended. You deserve to be wanted so completely that the whole world knows you belong." Tears burned in Rowan's eyes. She had spent so long believing the opposite, believing that she was worthless, faithless, deserving of every cruelty that had been heaped upon her. Hearing someone speak of her worth like it was obvious, undeniable, simply true, it loosened something deep within her, a dam she hadn't known she'd built. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, the words catching on a sob. "How to trust you. How to believe that you won't change your mind, won't decide I'm too much trouble, won't wake up one morning and realize you've made a terrible mistake." "Then don't trust me yet," Dante said gently. "Let me earn it. Let me prove, day by day, that I mean every word. You've been hurt badly enough that trust should not come easily. I would think less of you if it did." A laugh escaped her, wet and broken. "What if it takes years? What if I'm still flinching from shadows when I'm old and gray? Then I will spend years at your side, and you will flinch from shadows with a mate who loves you regardless." He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "I have waited 3 centuries for you, Rowan. I can wait as long as you need." The weeks that followed were the strangest of Rowan's life. She had expected something. Some reversal, some revelation, some moment when the fairy tale crumbled and reality came crashing back. But day after day, Dante remained exactly what he had shown himself to be: patient, protective, present. He appeared in her doorway each evening, asking silent permission to take his place in the chair by her fire. He never touched her uninvited. He never demanded anything. He simply was, a steady anchor in the storm of her healing. They talked sometimes. Long conversations that stretched into the night, about his kingdom and her childhood, about the books she loved and the battles he had fought, about nothing at all and everything that mattered. She learned that he had been mated once before, centuries ago, to a female named Leanna, who had died bringing their stillborn son into the world. She learned that he had closed himself off after that loss, becoming the cold and distant king the world saw, because feeling nothing seemed safer than feeling too much. I understand, she told him one evening, watching firelight dance across his features. After Orion, after everything, I thought it would be easier to just stop hoping, to accept that I would never have what I wanted and learn to live with less. And now? His voice was soft, almost hesitant. Now I'm terrified, she admitted, because I'm starting to hope again. And I don't know what I'll do if this turns out to be another lie. Dante rose from his chair and crossed to the bed where she sat propped against pillows, her belly round beneath the soft fabric of her nightgown. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his, and his gaze was earnest and utterly sincere. I will never lie to you, he said. I may fail you in other ways. I am not perfect, Rowan, not even close, but I will never deceive you. I will never make promises I don't intend to keep. And I will never, ever make you feel worthless again. She believed him. Against all reason, against every lesson Orion's betrayal had taught her, she believed him. The first sign that everything was about to shatter came on a gray morning in early winter. Rowan was in the gardens with Lysandra, walking carefully through the paths that had been cleared of snow, when a commotion erupted at the palace gates. Shouting voices, the clatter of hooves, the deep bark of commands from the sentinels on duty. What's happening? Rowan asked, her hand going instinctively to her belly. Lysandra's expression had gone tight with something that looked like fear. I don't know, but we should get you inside. Lady Rowan! A servant came running, skirts flying, face pale with urgency. Lady Rowan, you must come quickly. The king requests your presence in the throne room. There's an ambassador. He says he's from... From where? Rowan demanded, though some part of her already knew. Already felt the cold dread spreading through her veins like poison. From Darkhollow, my lady. The servant's voice dropped to a whisper. He says his name is Orion Stormborn, and he's demanding your return. The walk to the throne room felt like a march to the gallows. Rowan could hear them before she saw them, Orion's honeyed voice weaving its familiar lies, Dante's cold responses cutting through like shards of ice. Her hands trembled so badly she had to clasp them together, pressing them against the swell of her belly where her daughter kicked with agitation. He's here, and he's going to ruin everything. The doors opened, and Rowan saw him. Orion Stormborn stood in the center of the throne room, golden and gleaming, wearing the formal robes of a Darkhollow ambassador. He looked exactly as she remembered. Beautiful, charming, radiating the easy confidence of a male who had never been denied anything in his life. Behind him stood 3 warriors in Darkhollow colors, their hands resting meaningfully on their sword hilts, and in front of him, between Orion and the obsidian throne, Dante waited like a gathering storm. Ah, there she is. Orion's voice was warm, welcoming, as if they were old friends reunited after a long separation. Rowan, my darling, I've been so worried about you. Rowan's wolf snarled, pressing against her control with a fury that shocked her. She forced herself to stand straight, to meet those golden eyes without flinching. Ambassador Stormborn. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. What brings you to Shadowfang? I could ask the same of you. Orion's smile never wavered. The last anyone saw, you were fleeing into the wilderness, abandoning your pack, taking valuable assets with you. I fled because your pack tried to kill me. A misunderstanding, Orion said smoothly. Emotions were running high after certain revelations. I'm sure you understand. The important thing is that I'm here now to bring you home. This is my home. Rowan felt Dante's eyes on her, felt the bond pulsing with support and reassurance. King Dante has granted me sanctuary. So I've heard. Orion's gaze flickered to Dante, and something cold moved behind those golden eyes. An interesting arrangement. A pregnant female, of unknown paternity, granted the protection of an unmated king? Surely you can understand how this appears to outside observers. I understand how it appears to you, Dante said, his voice deceptively mild. Which is to say, irrelevant. Lady Rowan is my guest. Her child will be my heir. Whatever claims Dark Hollow believes it has on her are null and void. But that's precisely the problem, Your Majesty. Orion's smile turned predatory. You see, the child Lady Rowan carries is not of unknown paternity. It's mine. Conceived within our legitimate mate bond before our unfortunate separation. The words hung in the air like poison. Rowan felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, she sensed Dante go rigid, his power flaring with something that might have been surprise or fury or both. You rejected me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. In front of the entire pack. You called me faithless, claimed the child wasn't yours. I was angry, hasty. We all say things we don't mean in the heat of the moment. Orion spread his hands, the picture of reasonableness. But I've had time to think, Rowan, to realize what we had, to understand what I threw away. His eyes dropped to her belly, and she saw something calculating in his gaze. I want my child. I want my mate. And if the good king here has any objection, well, ancient bloodline laws are quite clear about these matters. You have no claim here, Dante said, but his voice had gone tight. Don't I? Orion's smile widened. A legitimate mate bond was never formally dissolved. A child conceived within that bond carries storm-born blood, and as the child's biological father, I have the right to claim both mother and offspring under the old laws. He met Dante's gaze with something that looked like triumph. Unless, of course, you'd like to go to war over a female who might still be legally bound to me. The throne room had gone deathly silent. Rowan could feel the nobles watching, calculating, waiting to see how their king would respond to this challenge. Could feel the trap closing around her with each passing moment. Orion had planned this, had waited until she was settled, until she had started to believe she was safe, until she had something to lose. Now he was here to take it all away. You will leave my kingdom, Dante said, his voice like the edge of a blade, before the sun sets, or I will remove you myself. I'll leave, Orion agreed pleasantly. For now. But I'll be back, Your Majesty, with lawyers and priests and every dusty document required to prove my claim. And when I return... His eyes found Rowan's, and she saw the cruelty behind the mask, the hatred he had hidden so well throughout their mating. When I return, I'll be taking what's mine. He turned and swept from the throne room, his warriors falling into step behind him. Rowan's knees gave out. Dante caught her before she could fall, scooping her into his arms with a gentleness that belied the fury still crackling through the bond between them. She pressed her face into his chest, breathing in his scent of pine and winter storms, trying to ground herself against the terror threatening to sweep her away. He can't take me, she whispered. Please, please tell me he can't. He won't, Dante said, the words a promise that resonated through the bond like a vow. I don't care what laws he invokes, what documents he produces, what claims he makes. You are my mate. Your daughter is my heir. And I will burn this world to ashes before I let anyone take either of you from me. She should have been frightened by the violence in his voice, should have been disturbed by the casual promise of destruction. Instead, she felt only relief. The desperate, devastating relief of a woman who had finally found someone willing to fight for her. He won't stop, she said. He never stops. He'll find a way. He'll twist everything. Then we'll find a way too. Dante's arms tightened around her. Together. I promised you that you wouldn't have to defend yourself alone, Rowan. I meant it. She looked up at him. at those silver eyes that had become her anchor in an ever-shifting storm, and spoke the words she had been afraid to say. "I trust you," she whispered. "I don't know when it happened, but I do. I trust you." Something shifted in Dante's expression, some final wall crumbling, some last defense falling away. He pressed his forehead to hers, and she felt the bond between them blaze brighter than it ever had before. "I love you," he said. "I know it's too soon. I know you're not ready to hear it. But I need you to understand. Whatever happens next, whatever Orion tries, whatever the world throws at us, I love you. And I will never stop fighting for you." Rowan closed her eyes, let those words wash over her like rain on parched earth. She wasn't ready to say them back. Not yet. The wounds Orion had left were still too fresh, the scars too raw. But she could feel something growing in the broken places of her heart, something green and tender and impossibly hopeful. For now, that was enough. For now, she was safe in the arms of her mate, carrying a daughter who would never know the pain of rejection, protected by a king who had promised to burn the world for her. The war was coming. Orion would return with his laws and his lies and his relentless hunger for destruction. But for the first time since her world shattered, Rowan believed she might actually survive it. The summons came 3 days later, delivered by a herald in dark hollow colors, who trembled as he handed the scroll to Dante's steward. Rowan watched from across the great hall as the king unrolled the parchment, his expression going stone cold as he read its contents. "He's invoked the right of arbitration," Dante said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "Before the full court, before witnesses from every pack in the northern territories." His silver eyes found hers, and she saw something that might have been fear flickering in their depths. "He's demanding you answer his claims publicly, Rowan. If you refuse, ancient law considers it an admission of guilt." The nobles gathered in the hall began to murmur, their voices a low tide of speculation and judgment. Rowan felt their eyes on her like weights, pressing down on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. This was exactly what Orion wanted. A public spectacle where he could twist every word, manipulate every truth, paint her as the villain in a story she had never chosen to be part of. "When?" she asked, and was proud that her voice didn't shake. "Tomorrow, at the midday bell." Dante crumpled the parchment in his fist. "He's given us no time to prepare, no opportunity to gather evidence or witnesses. He wants you off balance, desperate, easy to manipulate." "Then that's exactly what he won't get." Rowan straightened her spine, one hand pressed against her swollen belly where her daughter kicked in anxious response to her mother's racing heart. "I'll face him. I'll answer his accusations. And I'll make him choke on every lie he's ever told about me." Dante crossed the hall in 3 long strides, taking her hands in his. "You don't have to do this alone. I can speak for you, challenge him on your behalf, invoke my rights as your—" "As my what?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't take it back. "We haven't completed the bond, Dante. We haven't marked each other. In the eyes of the law, I'm still unmated, and my child is still unclaimed by any alpha." She squeezed his hands, feeling the warmth of him seep into her cold fingers. "He's using that against us. He knows that as long as I bear no mark, he can challenge any claim you make. Then we mark each other tonight." Dante's voice was rough, urgent. "Before the sun rises. Before he has a chance to—" "No." The word tasted like ashes, but she forced it out anyway. "If we mark each other now, it looks like desperation. Like we're trying to circumvent his legal challenge through a technicality." She met his eyes, willing him to understand. "I need to face him as I am. Unmarked. Unclaimed. I need to prove that I'm not afraid of his accusations, that I don't need a mate's protection to stand against him. I need to do this for myself, Dante. For my daughter. For every woman who's ever been cast aside by a male who was supposed to love her. Something shifted in Dante's expression, and she felt a wave of fierce pride flow through the bond between them. "My brave little wolf," he murmured, "you continue to surprise me." "I'm not little," she reminded him, gesturing at her very pregnant belly. "And I'm not sure I'm brave. But I am angry. And tomorrow, Orion Stormborn is going to learn exactly what happens when he pushes me too far." The throne room was packed with bodies when Rowan entered the following day. Nobles and warriors and common folk all pressed together to witness the spectacle. The scent of anticipation hung heavy in the air, sharp and almost hungry, and she felt her wolf bristle at the attention. So many eyes, so many whispered judgments, so many people waiting to see her fall. But she didn't fall. She walked with her head high and her shoulders back, one hand resting protectively on her belly, the other held firmly in Dante's grasp. He had insisted on escorting her to the center of the room, on standing beside her as she faced the crowd. Not to speak for her. She had made him promise not to interfere unless absolutely necessary, but simply to be present. A silent reminder that she was not alone. Orion stood on the opposite side of the room, flanked by his warriors and a cluster of priests in dusty robes who clutched ancient scrolls to their chests. He looked different than he had at their last meeting, more polished, more prepared. His dark hair was carefully arranged, his clothes immaculate, his expression one of wounded sincerity. He was playing a role, she realized. The wronged mate, the concerned father, the victim of a manipulative woman who had seduced his enemy. "Rowan Darkhollow," the head priest intoned, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "You stand accused of abandoning your lawful mate without proper dissolution of your bond, of conceiving a child within a sanctified mating and then attempting to deny the father his rightful claim, of using dark magic to enchant the Alpha King and steal his protection under false pretenses." The priest's watery eyes met hers. "How do you answer these charges?" Rowan felt the room hold its breath. She felt Dante's hand tighten on hers, felt the bond between them pulse with barely restrained protective fury. She felt her daughter kick, once, twice, as if urging her mother forward. She felt for the first time in months absolutely certain of what she had to do. "I invoke the right of truth," she said, and her voice rang through the hall like a bell. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the dust motes seemed to freeze in the slanting afternoon light, and she watched as understanding dawned on face after face throughout the crowd. The right of truth. The ancient ritual that predated pack law, that predated the kingdoms, that had been used since the first wolves walked these lands. A ritual where lies caused physical agony to the speaker, where the truth was ripped from the soul whether you wanted to speak it or not. A ritual that could not be cheated, could not be manipulated, could not be twisted by even the most skilled liar. "You can't," Orion started, his mask slipping for just a moment to reveal the panic beneath. "I can," Rowan interrupted. "The accused has the right to invoke the right of truth in any formal accusation. It's written in the same ancient laws you're trying to use against me, Orion. Or did you think I hadn't done my research?" She released Dante's hand and walked toward the center of the room, where a stone altar had been set up for the proceedings. The sacred stone sat in the middle, a rough chunk of obsidian veined with silver that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. She had read about this stone in the Shadowfang archives, had learned its history and its power. It had been used to determine guilt and innocence for millennia. It did not lie. Neither would she. "I, Rowan of the Darkhollow Pack," she said, placing her palm flat against the cold surface of the stone, "do submit myself to the right of truth. Let my words be weighed, let my soul be judged, and let the truth be known." The stone flared beneath her hand, and she felt something ancient and implacable settle into her bones. It was not painful, Not exactly, but it was overwhelming. A pressure that seemed to fill every corner of her being, leaving no room for deception or half-truths or comfortable lies. "Speak your truth," the head priest said, his voice hushed with something that might have been awe. Rowan took a deep breath and began. "I was mated to Orion Stormborn in a ceremony witnessed by all of Dark Hollow Pack. Our bond was true. Our mating was legitimate. And the child I carry was conceived within that bond, during a time when I still believed my mate loved me." The words flowed out of her, clear and steady, and she felt the stone's approval like warmth spreading through her veins. 3 months into my pregnancy, Orion rejected me. He stood before our pack and claimed that I had been unfaithful, that my child was another male's bastard, that I had betrayed our sacred bond. She turned to face Orion, watching the color drain from his face as he realized what was about to happen. "He lied," she said simply. "He rejected me not because I was unfaithful, but because he had found another female he desired more. He spread false accusations to cover his own shame. He had me beaten and cast out into the winter wilderness to die, because my existence was an inconvenience to his new ambitions." The stone blazed beneath her hand, confirming every word. She heard gasps from the crowd, heard the rustle of movement as nobles exchanged shocked glances, but she wasn't finished. "I have never used dark magic," she continued. "I have never enchanted anyone. The Alpha King's protection was offered freely, and I accepted it because I was desperate and afraid and had nowhere else to go. The bond between us—" She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but pressed on. "The bond between us is a true mate bond, recognized by both our wolves. It was not manufactured or manipulated. It simply is." She lifted her hand from the stone and turned to face Orion across the room. "Your turn." For a long moment, Orion didn't move. She could see the calculation in his eyes, the desperate search for some escape, some loophole, some way to avoid what was coming. But there was no escape from the right of truth. The entire court was watching. The ancient laws he had invoked demanded that both parties submit to the stone's judgment. "I don't—" he started. "You invoked ancient law," Dante said, speaking for the first time since the proceedings began. His voice was cold and final. "You demanded this arbitration. You accused my mate before witnesses from every territory. Now you will answer her truth with your own, or be condemned by your silence." Orion's face twisted with hatred as he approached the altar. His hand trembled as he placed it on the stone, and Rowan saw sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air of the throne room. "Speak your truth," the priest commanded. Orion opened his mouth and screamed. The sound ripped through the hall, raw and agonized, as the stone's power tore into him. He tried to pull his hand away, but some force held him in place, and Rowan watched as words began spilling from his lips against his will. "I lied," he gasped, his body convulsing with pain. "I lied about everything. She was faithful, always faithful. But I wanted Sarah Blackthorne, wanted her power, wanted her father's alliance. I forged those letters myself, bought those gifts and planted them in Rowan's things. Rowan was inconvenient, so I made her disappear." Another scream, this one edged with something like madness. "The child is mine. I know it's mine. I rejected my own mate and my own pup because I was bored with her." He collapsed to his knees, still unable to release the stone. His warriors made as if to help him, but the crowd had pressed forward, and there was nowhere for them to go. "I came here to take her back," Orion continued, the words ripped from him like blood from a wound. "Not because I want her, because Sarah rejected me too, and I need an heir, and Dark Hollow's Alpha demanded I clean up my mess. I was going to claim the child and dispose of Rowan as soon as the laws allowed. I was going to—" "Enough," Rowan said, and the stone released him. Orion crumpled to the floor, gasping and shaking. The throne room had gone deathly silent, every face turned toward the broken male at the foot of the altar. Rowan stood over him, looking down at the wolf who had once promised to love her forever, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness. Never that. But perhaps, finally, closure. You were nothing, Orion snarled, looking up at her with hatred burning in his eyes. You were always nothing. A pretty face and a warm body and not a single interesting thought in your head. You should have died in that snow. You should have... He lunged. Even weakened by the right of truth, even broken and exposed, Orion Stormborn was still an alpha wolf with centuries of training. His claws extended as he launched himself at Rowan, aiming for her throat, his eyes wild with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. Dante moved, but Rowan moved faster. The words rose from somewhere deep inside her, from her wolf, who had been caged and broken and silenced for too long. The ancient stone's power still hummed in her blood, but this was not the stone's magic. This was her own. Her wolf, finally freed from the cage of Orion's rejection, surged forward with a fury that demanded release. The strength had always been there, waiting. She had simply needed to stop being afraid of it. I, Rowan of Nopak, she said, her voice ringing with a power that froze Orion mid-lunge. Reject you, Orion Stormborn. Completely and eternally. The words were more than words. They were power, ancient and absolute, and she felt them tear through the remnants of the bond that had once tied her to this male. She felt his claim on her shatter like glass, felt every chain he had ever wrapped around her heart dissolve into nothing. May the bond you broke, she continued, as Orion writhed in the air before her, suspended by forces beyond either of their understanding, become your chains. And then the bond recoiled. All the pain he had caused her, all the rejection, all the cruelty, it flowed backward through the severed connection like poison seeking its source. Orion screamed again, but this sound was different. This was the sound of a soul being consumed by its own malice, of a wolf being destroyed by the very weapon he had used against his mate. Dante's claws found Orion's throat before he hit the ground. The Alpha King's eyes had gone pure gold, his wolf fully present, and when he spoke, his voice resonated with the power of an ancient line. For crimes against my mate, Dante said, his words a sentence and an execution in one, I claim the blood price. His claws tore, and Orion Stormborn died on the floor of the Shadowfang throne room, destroyed by his own lies and his mate's righteous rejection. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then Dante turned to face the crowd, his claws still dripping, his eyes slowly fading from gold back to silver. Let it be known, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, that Rowan Darkhollow is innocent of all charges. Let it be known that her former mate has been executed for his crimes against her and against this court. And let it be known... He turned to Rowan, and his expression softened in a way that made her heart ache. Let it be known that she is my true mate, recognized by blood and by law, and that any who threaten her threaten me. The nobles dropped to their knees. The warriors bowed their heads. And Rowan stood in the center of it all, her hand pressed to her belly where her daughter kicked in triumph, and let herself believe, for the first time, that she was truly safe. They didn't speak as Dante led her from the throne room. They didn't speak as he guided her through the winding corridors of the palace, past servants who averted their eyes and guards who pressed themselves against the walls. They didn't speak until they reached his private chambers, until the heavy door closed behind them and they were finally, blessedly, alone. Then Rowan turned to face him, and the words spilled out before she could stop them. I love you. Dante went absolutely still. His pale eyes searched her face, looking for doubt, for fear, for any sign that she didn't mean it. But there was no doubt left in her, no fear, only the overwhelming certainty that this male, This alpha king who had knelt at her feet, who had promised to burn the world for her, who had let her face her demons with nothing but his silent support at her back, was the other half of her soul. "I love you," she said again, stepping closer. "I should have said it before. I was afraid and hurt, and so convinced that no one could ever truly want me that I couldn't let myself believe." He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was 3 centuries of loneliness and weeks of desperate restraint all pouring out in a single searing moment. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, something sacred, while his mouth claimed hers with a hunger that left no room for doubt. "Say it again," he breathed against her lips. "I love you." Again. "I love you, Dante. I love you. I love you. I—" His mouth found her neck, and she gasped as she felt his teeth graze the sensitive skin at the junction of her shoulder. Not biting. Not yet. Just tasting. Just promising. "I need to mark you," he said, his voice rough with barely controlled desire. "I need everyone to know you're mine. I need to feel you in my soul every moment of every day until I die and beyond. But only if you're ready. Only if you want—" Yes. The word was a sob, a prayer, a vow. "Yes. Mark me. Claim me. Make me yours." But before he could move, she pressed her hand against his chest, feeling his heart pound beneath her palm. On one condition. He raised an eyebrow, a hint of his usual sardonic humor breaking through the intensity of the moment. "You're bargaining with an alpha king while I'm trying to claim you as my mate?" "I am." She smiled, fierce and bright. "I want to mark you too. I want you to be mine as much as I'm yours. Equal. Complete. Forever." For a moment, Dante simply stared at her. Then something gave way in his expression, some final barrier, some last defense, some ancient fear that he would never be truly loved in return. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes to everything. Yes to you." He sank to his knees before her, baring his neck in a gesture of submission that no alpha king had made in centuries. His throat was exposed, vulnerable, offered freely to a female who had been rejected and broken and remade in fire. Rowan's wolf rose within her, golden and fierce, and finally, whole. She bent down and pressed her mouth to his neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath her lips. He shuddered as her teeth grazed his skin, his hands coming up to grip her hips with trembling fingers. She could feel his anticipation through the bond between them, could feel how desperately he wanted this, how long he had waited for someone to claim him in return. She bit. The taste of him flooded her mouth. Pine and power and something that was uniquely Dante. She felt the bond between them explode open, felt 300 years of memories and emotions pouring through the connection. His first mate, loved and lost. His centuries of loneliness, of pretending not to want what everyone else had. His desperate hope when he had first seen her, broken on his throne room floor. His terror that he would lose her too. And beneath it all, love. Love so vast and deep and fierce that it stole her breath and left her trembling. She released his neck, licking the wound as it healed into a silver scar, her mark, permanent and eternal, proclaiming to all the world that this king belonged to her. Then Dante rose to his feet, and the look in his eyes made her heart stutter. "My turn," he growled. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the massive bed that dominated one side of the chamber. When he laid her down against the furs, his hands were gentle, careful of her swollen belly, but his eyes blazed with barely restrained hunger. "Are you sure?" he asked one last time. "Once I mark you, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me forever, in this life, and whatever comes after." Rowan reached up and pulled him down to her. "I've never been more sure of anything." His mouth found her neck, and she felt his teeth press against the junction of her shoulder. For a moment there was pain, sharp and bright and overwhelming. Then the pain transformed, becoming something else entirely. Pleasure bloomed through her body like fire, like sunlight, like every good thing she had ever known concentrated into a single point of perfect bliss. She heard herself cry out, felt her fingers dig into his shoulders, felt the bond between them snap into place with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. And then she felt him, not just his physical presence, but his soul, his essence. Everything he was and had been and would ever be poured into her through the bond, and she knew, in that moment, that she would never truly be alone again. Mine, he growled against her skin, the word vibrating through her blood. Yours, she breathed, pulling him closer. And you're mine. Forever, they whispered together. In the aftermath, they lay tangled together on the furs, her head resting on his chest, his arms wrapped protectively around her. She could feel him through the bond now, a constant presence at the back of her mind, warm and steady and filled with contentment. I should have been terrified, she murmured, when Orion attacked. I should have frozen or screamed or waited for you to save me. But you didn't. Dante's voice was soft with wonder. You saved yourself. You rejected him, and the bond itself became his destruction. I didn't know I could do that. She traced the mark on his neck with her fingertips, marveling at the silver scar. I didn't know I had that kind of power in me. You always did. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You just needed to remember how to use it. One moon later, Rowan stood in the great hall of Shadowfang Palace, dressed in silver and black, the crown of the Luna Queen glinting in her dark hair. Her daughter, born 3 weeks past, perfect and healthy and with deep brown eyes that matched her mother's, slept peacefully in Dante's arms as the nobles of every northern territory knelt before their new queen. The Dark Hollow Pack had sent tributes of apology, gold and jewels, and a formal declaration that Rowan had been wrongfully exiled. She had accepted them with the grace of a queen and the memory of a survivor, and then she had filed them away in the treasury, never to be thought of again. She had a new pack now, a new family, a new life. You're thinking very loudly, Dante murmured through the bond. Rowan smiled, watching as the last of the nobles rose and the celebrations began in earnest. I'm thinking about how strange life is. A few months ago, I was dying in the snow, and now I'm queen of the most powerful pack in the realm. You were always meant to be a queen. Dante shifted their daughter in his arms, and the baby made a soft sound of contentment. I knew it the moment I saw you, broken and bleeding and still somehow brighter than anything I had ever seen. Flatterer, truth-teller. He leaned down to kiss her, and she felt the bond between them pulse with warmth. We should have her naming ceremony soon. The court is already speculating about what we'll call her. Rowan looked at their daughter, at the tiny fingers curled against Dante's chest, at the warm brown eyes that blinked sleepily at the world, at the perfect bow of her lips. This child who had been the catalyst for everything, who had survived rejection and exile and a journey through the frozen wilderness, who had been loved, even before she was born, by a king who had sworn to claim her as his own. Aurora, she said softly, for the dawn that came after the longest night. Dante's eyes met hers, and she saw them glisten with tears he was too proud to shed in public. Aurora Shadowfang, he said, his voice rough, heir to the throne of the North, daughter of 2 wolves who found each other against all odds. Later that night, after the celebrations had ended and the nobles had retired to their chambers, Dante and Rowan stood together on the balcony of their quarters, Aurora sleeping between them in a cradle woven from moonvine. You have given me everything I never dared want, Dante whispered, pressing his forehead to Rowan's. A mate, a daughter, a future I had stopped believing in. You gave me the same thing, she whispered back. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me safety when I had forgotten what it felt like. You gave me love when I had stopped believing I deserved it. Through the bond, their wolves sang in harmony, finally, eternally home. And in a kingdom of ice and shadows, beneath the endless dance of the aurora, a rejected queen and her king began there forever.